Welcome to another episode of Zeitgeist Radio, the musical podcast where each episode we explore the connection between music and culture from the past to the present. Zeitgeist means spirit of the times and is the collection of cultural forces that all contribute to what it feels like to be alive and part of a dynamic culture. Music is a huge part of that, and in this podcast we explore all the ways culture and music are intertwined. I'm your host, Morgan Rowe, founder of the Zeitgeist Academy. My guest this episode is Christopher Steig, a clarinet performer and transcriber out of Portland, Oregon. Welcome to Zeitgeist Radio. Thanks for being on my podcast.
Yeah, first time for everything, right?
I know. I'm so excited. It's fun because you and I have been friends for a long time, and we know each other's musical journeys pretty well, but I feel like there's always more stuff every time I talk to you that you're doing or that you're like working on. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, hey, by the way, for the last 8 years, I've been doing this project. And I'm like, what? So I'm excited to kind of just dive in and talk to you about all the projects that you do, including one that you have coming up that is super exciting that I'm coming up for. So do you want to talk about that a little bit and give people, why don't we start with an intro? Tell people a little bit about who you are and who you are musically too.
My name is Christopher Steig. I am a clarinetist, and I'm going to say that in the very broadest of sense because I actually play all 6 clarinets with the Oregon Symphonic Band, the Lake Oswego Millennium Concert Band, and the Zephyr Clarinet Choir. And I've been playing clarinet since, 1993?
Nice. So a little bit.
And I've dabbled with saxophones, have a few saxophones of my own, dabbled with pipe organ and piano. I've even constructed a PVC subcontrabass clarinet, single note because, yeah. And I've actually used it in performance, 2 variants, one for the getting down to a low concert A at the bottom of the piano for the Rachmaninoff Second Symphony, third movement, and one that goes down to the concert C below that for David Maslanka's Give Us This Day.
Well, and you compose too.
Yes.
In fact, you compose a lot of stuff, and it's composing and arranging. So first of all, for people who don't necessarily know the difference, can you get into that a little bit? Like who you are as a composer versus who you are as an arranger. Those are 2 completely different skills, I feel like.
It is. And I would say that in a way, composing is the heart of the 2. It might not be universally true, but it's the heart of the 2 for me because there involves a lot more planning and conceptualizing and figuring out where to do things, how to deal with transitions, and being aware of the form and making sure everything sounds good. My compositions are a little bit fewer and far between. My most notable composition at this point would be a ragtime piece I wrote for piano. It is available on YouTube if you want to listen to it.
It's cool. I feel like you always have, continue, because I feel like you're being really humble here because you say you dabble and you don't compose as much, but I mean, how many files do you think you have on your computer that you've shared with me over the years of original compositions? You compose actually a lot. You probably arrange more, but you compose a lot too.
The reason I discount composition is because most of the things I've done is incomplete, just random ideas that I don't know where to go with is the problem. And
sure.
Unlike with writing, it's harder to get an outline going to describe where I'm going, to have a structure in place. It feels like in writing this the time of outlining and pantsing, where you just be going by the seat of your pants. And I feel with composition, it's more of a pantsing experience. And that's probably not true for most composers. It's just I haven't found a way to really generate the skills to have an outline. With arranging, you're taking an existing piece of music and you're either condensing it down and doing snippets, like medleys are a very good example of this. And it's actually a reason why I don't like medleys in the first place, because they just distill everything to the very base thing. And you just give you a taste of a sample medley, like especially the musical medleys, and you don't hang on to that particular song long enough to give it any justice. But arranging is generally like you're taking a piece, and so good arrangements will take a piece and distill it down for a broader experience for various ensembles. So like you're taking a more established piece and making it easier for a group of younger musicians. That's a good arrangement.
Right.
Some arrangements will be the medley format, but they actually do each of the songs justice. Like one that comes to mind is the when Oregon Symphonic Band played a few years back before times before COVID. We played an arrangement of Beauty and the Beast, and each song was done justice. Each transition led well into the next piece, versus like say some West Side Story arrangements I've seen where you just get the snippet, move on to the next piece, and you're left unsatisfied.
Right. Yeah. Because they don't. Sometimes they don't even really finish. They just give the parts that people know, but they don't even finish really. Like maybe they finished one theme, but there's a whole other like part of the theme that they just cut out completely.
It's like I'm thinking the terms precedent and antecedent, and I don't think that's quite the right term. But it's like you're getting the front half of the melody, which everyone knows, and then completely disregarding the back half. It's like you're getting if there's a melody has an A and B form, you're just getting A and then moving on to something else.
Right.
And then there are transcriptions, and this is what I do. Is when you're taking a piece of music and you're preserving 100% of the notes or as many of the notes as possible while taking it from the original setting, orchestral, to another wind ensemble, or in this case, pipe organ to clarinet choir. I do a lot of that stuff with jazz box stuff. You mentioned 8 years. You're actually dead on in this case because I was reviewing the notes for this as I was trying to get some program notes done for the Lake Oswego band. Is the Lake Oswego Millennium Concert Band is premiering my transcription of Saint-Saëns' first symphony, second movement, the Scherzo March, and I'm taking the original orchestral version, going through the score and putting in the music and transcribing it for winds.
Can you talk about so when you do that, and this is actually really cool for me because I know you do this and I know theoretically how it works, but I don't think I've ever asked you what your process is. First of all, the world of symphonic works is so vast. How the heck do you choose what you want to work on in any particular given moment in time? And then kind of take it from there.
Let's see here. The first orchestral transcription I did was Reinhold Glier's Second Symphony. Got the first two movements done of that. Kind of petered out on the third movement, even though I really wanted to do the fourth movement. The fourth movement might actually be too chaotic, if you will, for an actual wind band to really tackle properly. But I have to actually transcribe it before I can really figure that out. And it just happened because I was driving around and had the classical station on, and then and the host was saying, "We're going to play Glier 2. I'd rather play Glier 3 because it is my favorite Glier symphony, but it is a monster of a symphony, like an hour and a half long. So we're playing this one here too." So we played it, and it's one of those like it's just immediately just grabs you and doesn't let go because it's how dark of a Russian symphony it is. You just hear the Russian bears charge right through from the get-go. Nice. So I went and found the score and got to work.
Nice.
And ironically enough, the recording I got actually plays it slower than what Glier called for in the score, which is unusual in orchestral music because orchestras try to play everything as fast as they can usually.
Yeah.
The next one I remember trying to do a transcription of the Tchaikovsky's fifth finale because there are already band versions of it, but they actually cut out. First, they adjust the key to be more band friendly, which you know what a good band should be able to.
We'll get into the Chris and keys in a minute.
Yes.
Also get into Chris and rhythm in a minute, but that's for later.
But the biggest problem with this, and this is a lot of problem with orchestral music moving over to band, is that they will abridge. And abridgments aren't necessarily a bad thing. As a actually good Romeo and Juliet abridgment into the band. Is it Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet? The famous da, 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 da. I think it's Tchaikovsky. I can't remember for some reason. But the finale of the Fifth Symphony actually cut out two key moments in the finale. And when I was actually trying to play along with this, or follow along the band version with the orchestra version, it's like I got lost because wait, this section is actually missing.
Oh man!
So I started a transcription of it, but got lost.
Sure.
So another one I've done, and this is actually the symphony I have done the complete thing, but it would definitely need to add some editing. Is Saint-Saëns' Third Symphony, the with organ, and there's some very difficult moments in terms of what some of the instruments are doing, but I think it'd be one that'd be worth doing, except when the ensemble has to find an organ to play along with it.
Right. Were you always in band? When did you start playing clarinet? You said 93, but like, is that
5th grade of elementary school?
Okay. And just straight into band and band all the way. Has there
and,
ever been a period when you haven't been in band?
That was 6th grade band. I was like at the time, because the way the 6th grade band, when I moved up to Portland, I went to middle school band. I was not enjoying it because the music being played was, it felt like they were playing out of the beginner's books, where it was like the pieces were not enjoyable to play. And I was actually at the point, because I had been playing so little at that point, and I was still ability level higher than the rest of the band, because for a lot of them it was their first year playing. It was
right. Yeah. Most schools in Portland don't have 5th grade band. They start in 6th. That makes sense.
So what my parents said is, okay, we want you to still play clarinet. We still think that's a worthwhile thing to do. So they did put me in a community orchestra. So I did have an orchestral experience through the end of high school, at least through my freshman year or so. I don't remember when I left Chamber Music Society of Oregon, but I played with them for a few years, and I went back to band in middle school in 8th grade, and did better at that point, because in 6th grade there was like the 6th grade band, and then there's the 7th and 8th grade band. And I think that's what it was. I was in the 6th grade band with everyone else who was starting off, when I should have been in the 7th grade band, but it might have been like you can't be in there because of the different period, and you need middle school schedules, I guess.
Oh, trust me, I have so many opinions on music and school.
I went to high school band. I remember at the times, like, playing the parts and whatnot. I went straight into the symphonic band in high school as a freshman, which is good. But I remember having a low opinion of the bass clarinet in particular in high school.
You?
and it just seemed that and part of it was because the music we're playing, the composers or arrangers. I can't say much about the arrangements because I didn't look at the bass counterparts, but for the original band stuff, the bass counterparts just weren't interesting to any very effective degree. And it wasn't until I was a junior in high school, when I got introduced to the alto clarinet, that I found a large clarinet that I really spoke to what a bass clarinet should have been.
Right. And then it just went from there, and the addiction started.
You can definitely say that. And because of that, and because of certain friends in high school, I also joined the Metropolitan Youth Symphony, played the concert band there, the symphonic band there, and got introduced in some really good pieces like Haydn-Wood's Manandine, and got introduced to PYP indirectly from there. And because of that, I continued with playing clarinet through college. I was initially a clarinet major, but I was really wanting to get interested in composing music. I had gotten my hands on my band teacher in high school had given me a recording of Johann de Meij's Lord of the Rings, and along that CD was also Percy Granger's Children's March. I think also of Alfred Reed's Hound of the Spring, which is a piece I played in Europe with the Oregon Ambassadors of Music, and that's actually one of the pieces I want to play again really badly.
So was it in college that you started? When did you write your first finished piece? Was that in college then, or did you dabble before?
I don't remember when I started that. It was I think it was during college. Sure. The Jubilatory March is a piece I've never been performed, but it's probably because it was literally a formal study of Granger's Children's March. It matches the entire Children's March from end to end. I did get a clarinet choir version of it. I have a band version that's never been performed, and I also made a clarinet choir version of it that did get performed, but I have opinions of the performance.
Sure. So I think one of the things that's really incredible about how you work with music is you have such a grasp of music theory. Did you study theory in high school as well, or just college?
Just college.
Just college. Yeah.
And I only did the first 2 years of theory because during college I wanted to switch over to composition, but the politics and then the music department were really bad at that point, and I was not. I decided to switch majors to geography, and the horn professor at the time was having issues with the band director at the time, and I was making my exit from the performing side at the university, and I asked him, hey, because he was also the conductor for the wind ensemble and the conservatory orchestra at PYP. I said, hey, do you need me to step to play with you guys on contrabass clarinet? Because he said he had to come into the band a few times and say, hey, we need players for the wind ensemble. He said, yeah, play contrabass clarinet. I said, okay, done.
Cool.
And because of that, I was able to get my transcription of the second movement of Glier's Second performed.
Nice.
I do have a recording of that. And each time I listen to it, I am actually quite amazed at how well the wind ensemble did with it, because by and large, this is a collection of middle school and high school students.
Yeah.
And it is not an easy piece at all.
Again, I have opinions on school and music. Like, kids rock. Kids are so good, and kids, when they put their mind and they practice, they put the practice time in, they're capable of a lot more than people often think.
This is very true, but I also have the impression that that they got performed at a kind of a flashpoint for the ensemble, because a few years back it was the wind ensemble was very new in PYP's history. A few years back it would have been too new for them to really get that going. And after I left, because I had graduated university, they didn't have the numbers or the experience in order to pull it off. When I was there, we played Johann de Meij's Lord of the Rings. We played Glier's Second. We played a number of difficult pieces on my recommendation that the conductor enjoyed. He had me play contrabass clarinet in the conservatory orchestra. We're talking actual symphony orchestra here, because they didn't have enough string basses, and we played Rachmaninoff Second, and that was the genesis of my transcription of Rachmaninoff Second. And I've got the first three movements done. The fourth movement is its own beast right now, but I have an entire transcription going on that, because that piece is phenomenal enough that it deserves to be recognized by the winds. And my approach to transcriptions is, yes, the winds should be able to handle on their own, but if the strings want to come in and join in to play their own part, come on in.
Sure.
And in fact, there are a few, the Toulouse Wind Orchestra, I found their YouTube channel fairly recently, actually has a full bass and cello section. Wind orchestras typically only have string basses from the strings. The Toulouse brought in full-on cellos to come in, and so they are at least taking the idea of bringing in the string section and running it in the in the wind pieces, like they did for Arturo Marquez's Dance On, and they played the wind version by Olivia Nicol, and here come the strings, perfect, I love it. They even added cello section to a couple wind only pieces, and it sounds phenomenal.
I picture that sounding really cool. Yeah, and that's cool because one thing that you and I have talked a lot about is there's a certain level of, I guess I would say, purity, and I don't mean that in a good sense, that a lot of conductors or composers as well have in regards to like splitting up what is band versus what is orchestra. For example, you have some opinions on saxophones, right?
Saxophone is a wonderful instrument family that orchestras criminally neglect.
I agree.
There are some composers who are going against the grain and bringing them into the orchestra, but they tend to be game composers, so for video games.
Yeah.
And obviously some composers in the early days, Maurice Ravel, for example, did champion the saxophone, but it never really caught on. And that's partly because of the politics in the music world at the time, where a lot of musicians just hated Adolphe Sax.
Right.
So without Adolphe Sax, the bass clarinet would not be where it is today, because he innovated. He took his innovations from the saxophone and applied them to the clarinet, to the bass clarinet, and came up with we have a much better instrument in our hands now. And that goes back to what my opinion of the bass clarinet was. We were playing. I had joined the Oregon Symphonic band after leaving university, getting my degree, and the section leader at the time was the bass clarinetist, and she just up and disappeared. No one, as far as I know, still no one knows what happened to her. She just up and quit.
What?
So I ended up at the rehearsal, and the person who basically had stepped in to take care of that particular concert series, it was a summer concert, said, I didn't know you were going to show up here. It's like, well, that's odd. So I volunteered to be the section leader at that point. So I actually was section leader for the clarinets for the next 5 years or so. And I realized, okay, well, we don't have a bass clarinet. I have access to one. I suppose I'll step up. I never really enjoyed it because the instrument just fought me, and it never, and because of that, so I had my opinions from the bass clarinet from back from high school. It's not really that great of an instrument. And I'm gonna get to you about the alto clarinet in a bit. But then I chanced on, I was on YouTube, a recording of Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre, because after OSB had performed it, performed by a bass clarinet quartet. And it was at that I realized what the bass clarinet was actually capable of.
Yeah.
So I ordered a new bass clarinet mouthpiece.
You were hooked.
I got the bass clarinet mouthpiece, and it transformed this bass clarinet into essentially a new instrument and something that was very representative of what a bass clarinet could be. Nice. It wasn't perfect because it's still a considered a student model wooden clarinet, which is good, but it didn't have the full range of what a modern professional bass clarinet does have. But it made the instrument much more playable, much more enjoyable to play, and it made the bass clarinet parts I was playing much more enjoyable to play. And while playing bass is still not my favorite thing, I'd rather play one of the larger clarinets or even the alto clarinet, where I have more freedom. Well, I don't know. But alto clarinet is just, I prefer playing alto clarinet because it's the redheaded stepchild of the clarinet family. And I prefer playing it because it gives the instrument the representation it needs.
Yeah, why do people hate that so much? What is the deal? It's like the alto clarinet and the viola, they get such a bad rap.
The difference is the viola is still an accepted instrument.
I guess so.
But the alto clarinet, it's weird because the attitude is, and the C melody tenor saxophone suffered the same fate too, except the alto clarinet still accepted the C melody tenor
Big
sax.
air quotes here.
Yeah, the C melody tenor sax and is more of a running joke than the alto clarinet.
But the alto clarinet, like, it serves, I don't know, maybe I am misunderstanding it, but it serves a purpose, right? Like,
it does.
It's like first, second, third, fourth horn, you have to have all four. And you can't, like, clarinets, like is, I don't know, talk to me in terms of something I understand here.
So you have your violin, viola, cello, bass. The breakdown is not perfect, but at least you have more representation of what's going on in terms of range.
Yeah.
You have the soprano, alto, tenor, and bari sax, and that quartet is complete. It's more akin to the voice, soprano, alto, baritone, and bass. Clarinets, it's weird. You have the little E flat clarinet, you have the B flat clarinet, the bass clarinet, and then the contrabass clarinet as the accepted members of the family. And why would you write for alto clarinet when you can have like the acre of B flat clarinets that'll cover everything in between? And the alto clarinet has a reputation of being out of adjustment, badly tuned, blah 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 blah. And the instrument and the players that play on it aren't up to snuff, and they make it sound bad. The tradition I hear is that because the band directors are saying, "Oh well, we have an alto clarinet, it needs to be covered. We'll put our last chair third clarinet on that." So the least experienced player on an instrument that really needs to have one of the better players on it, because if you're the only player on an instrument, you need to be able to play out on it.
Right.
Whereas they'll move one of the better players onto bass clarinet.
Right.
And contra alto, contra bass clarinet, they have more leeway what's going on here because they're more doubling the tubas or standing on there. So if a contra part is playing strictly a bass line, but it's being written higher than normal, you still have the luxury of dropping it down an octave and being a little bit more improvisational on it and get away with it. Whereas the alto clarinet composes, well, I don't know what to do with it. It's in the middle of the text here where it just gets covered up by the horns, by the brass, by the trombones or the mid-range woodwinds. No one's going to ever hear it, so why bother writing for it?
Gotcha. So why do people write for it?
Well, I've got an alto clarinet. Someone's going to have to play alto clarinet. Might as well give it a part here. I guess we'll just have it double the bass clarinet for the most part, and occasionally, I think that's what it is. Composers don't know what to do with it.
Sure.
So when I deal with it, and I think this is actually the problem with band music, is that they tend to write more with a band sound.
Yes, by which you mean Sousa marches.
Yeah. So it's like everyone's playing at the same time, and someone has a breakout solo from time to time. And this is not always true. That's gross oversimplification, because there are plenty of good pieces in the band literature or original pieces which do a better job of representing kind of that chamber feel from time to time. But when they do that, they have the specific instruments in mind that will get the solo. You get the classic oboe solo. You have the featuring the English horn, because that is one of the instruments that you will never hear if everyone is playing. Right. You have the occasional alto flute solo, especially if you're playing a John Williams Star Wars piece. But the alto clarinet is like one of those instruments like, well, no one's ever going to write a solo for an alto clarinet. I mean, because who cares? Right.
I think that's part of what makes it so interesting doing like your transcription, because you are taking, works that are for dozens, if not up to almost 100 musicians. Some of these symphonies can get huge, especially when you're talking Mahler. And transcribing, yes, every single note needs to be put over into the transcription, but there's a lot of creativity as far as voicing, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to talk about, like, how do you figure out what gets voiced where? Because that's actually really, really important. And, just because the strings have it here, does that mean that the clarinets get it there, like, automatically? Or do you change it based on what's going on?
Part of it is like, it's like, what would it sound nice on? Because, yeah, obviously, the strings, I can just put everything on clarinet. But the problem is the clarinet always have something going on in an orchestral setting anyway.
Right.
And you have to add in the saxophones. Well, how are you going to voice it until everything lines up? Because if I'm writing a big ensemble piece where I am calling for the 6 clarinets, because the contra alto and the contrabass clarinets will be running independent parts, so they both need to be covered. What are they doing versus what are the saxophones doing? Well, what are the percussion doing? Because that's actually a big one, because orchestras generally use, this is generally not true actually anymore. The percussion section generally does get love in the orchestras now. But for pieces I've been looking at, like Rachmaninoff, you'll have like triangle, snare, bass drum, and timpani. And the snare drum, and the bass drum generally don't get used too terribly much, while the timpani is the dominant orchestral percussion instrument.
Right. Whereas in band, you go and you look at, there's like an entire wall back there. There's like 8 people playing percussion, and how many different instruments?
Yeah, it's like you have the entire wall of unpitched percussions, all the snares, the tam-tams, the tom-toms. Then you also have the mallets and, piano.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, some of the saxophones will be picking up what the orchestral clarinets are doing, so the orchestral clarinets can move to what the strings are doing, and that's if the saxophones aren't doing what the strings are doing at that moment. So it's all like trying to decide, okay, this is going to sound good here, but what is this doing here? And orchestral brass tends to be much more of a cadential type of instrument if you're not a horn, because the horns are always doing their own thing. But
horn meaning French horn.
Yeah, the French horn. I just tend to call it the horn. Whereas the trombones, the trumpets, and the tuba tend to be more cadential, and when they are doing something more, it tends to be much more for that particular color, for that brassy orchestral brass sound, which is a different sound than what the band does. And there's a running joke of you don't want to encourage the trombones, and yeah, it's much more of a need to bring the trombones in a band, because you have up to 8 trombones in band.
Right.
In an orchestra, typical orchestra, I'm not counting Mahler here, because Mahler is smaller.
Mahler is different.
You tend to have the 3 trombones, 2 tenors, a bass, and then the tuba being the 4th member in that.
People come to me all the time asking if I can help them figure out if they have a good voice. In fact, I get asked that so much, I made a mini course you can take yourself to help figure out what good means to you, identify your strengths in your voice, and find the areas you can work on to make your voice even better. Head over to zeitgeistacademy.com/radio for free access. That's ZEITGEIST academy.com/radio. So there's one other project that I wanted to talk to you about, which you've been working on for a very long time. You are compiling a database of, the goal is, every single symphony ever written. Am I correct?
Yes, it is.
Yes. What in the world led you to be like, hey, I'm going to make a list?
And I am of the opinion that in many ways the symphony is the pinnacle of instrumental music, and
Western classical music
in the classical idiom. And this does include, when I'm using the classical idiom here, this includes both orchestral and band, because band does have such a degree in classical history. The first symphony written for band was written by Hector Berlioz. I have not substantiated this, but I've heard that Beethoven had written a band-only piece, but I have not substantiated that, and I've not really looked into it, but I've heard of that. Felix Mendelssohn wrote a couple wind-only pieces.
So what about the symphony for you? Again, when I say music theory, like it's theory and also form, I guess I should add. Like, you have a really strong grasp of theory and form, and that goes into, you have to make some decisions when you take this list, this database, seriously. And if it's in there, like, you're not just going to throw something in there for the fun of it. You actually analyze the form. So first of all, do you mind, just because I don't know how many of the listeners here are going to know the form of a symphony, going through like, what do you look for? What is this, the traditional form? Where do you look for? And where do you bend the rules a little bit? Because you have done that. And said, okay, yes, this would not typically be called a symphony, but I'm calling it a symphony for purposes of this project.
First of all, the typical symphony, as most people know it, is a four movement work, more or less codified by Joseph Haydn, and then perfected by Beethoven.
Beethoven made everything perfect. Fight me if you believe otherwise.
Beethoven did not make the Baroque music perfect.
Bach no, that's because it's not perfect, because it's not Beethoven. Again,
we all
fight
know
me.
Bach perfected
Fight
Baroque.
Me. Right, but then Beethoven perfected music. So
I don't know. Beethoven didn't write for saxophones, though.
Were saxophones around then? Because he probably
exactly,
would have.
Exactly. So
he absolutely would have.
He gets a pass for that.
He gets a pass.
Because Beethoven did introduce the trombone to the orchestra.
He totally would have been pro saxophone in orchestras.
Beethoven did introduce the choir into the orchestra.
Like I said, he's perfection. But anyway, I digress.
But so yeah, most people are familiar with the four movement symphony and how Beethoven pretty much perfected it. So you have the early symphony was, of course, you had CPE Bach, Christian Emanuel Bach. They wrote some symphonies, but the symphonies before Haydn and Beethoven were really kind of entr'acte type pieces of music. If you like take out Handel's Pastoral Symphony, and that's right in the middle of the Messiah. It's like a short, pleasant interlude, for example. And then you had see here, Michael Haydn wrote a bunch of symphonies. Even Johann Sebastian Bach wrote symphoniets, just miniature pieces, and symphonias. And that was something like more like a collection of short pieces for like inventions for clavier. Whereas Bach is not known for symphonies or not. He's known for his passions. The only reason that I would include Bach's symphonias into this database is for true completionists, to show how the symphony grew out of what the symphony is, basically a collection of sound, if you will. What Giovanni Gabrieli invented back in 1597 as the proto-symphony, the Sacrae Symphoniae.
Is that the first one on your list, the earliest one?
That's the earliest one I can track down.
1597?
1597.
So you're taking the symphony that we know today and tracing that back, kind of like, what is the common ancestor?
Common ancestor. Yeah. And because you have those variations of symphonias, symphonias, and whatnot, which tend to be a little bit lighter, but because we have that proto example by Giovanni Gabrieli and the Sacra Symphony, and then Adriano Bantarini's Ecclesiastic Symphony, and then Ludovico Viadana's Symphonie Musicali, these are examples from 1607, 1610. These are like very proto what would become, and that.
So when you listen to those pieces particularly, what is it that you notice that you include them, that you would consider them this ancestor?
Well, that's the thing. It is very difficult to find definitive recordings of these. So it's like, I don't really know what they are all about, because I only have snapshots like of individual movements so far of what I've heard. If I had the entire thing, it'd be great. But that's something that I hope to rectify with this database. And this is I was hoping to be like that, become a doctoral thesis at some point, but time is.
It may still happen.
It may still happen, but time is not friendly with other commitments.
But it may still happen. I believe in Dr. Steig.
But because you want to have these, where to show where the symphony is, where it came from, and what it is, as we know it, kind of want to include these original things.
Yeah.
So that because of that, we have Franz Xavier Richter's symphonias. we have we have C.P.E. Bach, we have William Boyce, we have, of course, Michael Haydn and Franz Haydn.
What about going the opposite direction? Because I know you've also had to make some decisions post Beethoven, but also specifically in this century or the last century, music went through some pretty serious upheavals as far as Western classical style. What's on that list that might surprise somebody?
We're going to go with one that's a staple of the band repertoire. And I've already mentioned this one earlier, but Haydn Wood's Man and Wien. It's called Man and Wien, Der alle Man, a Max tone poem. And tone poems are very much associated with Richard Strauss, Till Eulenspiegel. These are kind of the offshoot of Hector Berlioz, who was very much a programmatic symphonist.
Yeah.
So the Symphonie Fantastique, Harold en Italie, and Romeo and Juliet by Berlioz. And Harold in Italy, Romeo and Juliet do not bear the title symphony, but they are very much intended to be symphonies. And because of that, because of the idea of being very programmatic, be able to use the music to tell a story without invoking words to describe what's going on, just using the music to tell everything, that gave rise to the tone poem, which are essentially being able to describe a setting musically in a single movement, which is what Man and Wien is. Man and Wien does have the leeway of having 4 distinct sections in a single movement, because it is taking four Manx songs and putting it in a single setting.
So that's the connection that there's those 4, even though it's one piece that's not, I mean, a symphony is a piece, but you know what I mean? Like it's played without stopping, but there are 4 distinct sections that could be
interpreted as movements.
Interpreted, yeah.
But then you have also like Till Eulenspiegel, which is a single movement without any distinct sections, unless you count various events in the story that's being told by the piece. Like when the D clarinet or the E flat clarinet in the band version does the Till Eulenspiegel's death call near the climax.
Spoiler alert. Just
spoiler
kidding.
alert. Go listen to the piece.
Again,
but because of that, because you have these pieces doing this type of that has this type of scope in mind to tell that story, what's going on here in a single movement, that leads to looking at other idioms to see what they're doing.
Yeah.
So you have a couple pieces in jazz. Pat Metheny's The Way Up.
I see. This is where I was leading. That's on your list, isn't it?
Yeah. Pat Metheny is very much a fusion jazz composer, and one of the very followable jazz guitarists. Led the Pat Metheny group, and has quite a few pieces that are very programmatic in scope just by the titles. The Heat of the Day, The Awakening, Half-Life of Absolution. I mean, each of these pieces, maybe that wasn't quite the intention, but they do tell a story. And then you have The Way Up, which the first time I listened to it caught me off guard because it is the album, 76 minutes long.
Yeah.
And when I had the chance, when Pat Metheny came to Portland in 2005 to perform it, I actually had a chance to go and listen to that, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
76 minutes.
Its scope. It is actually, ironically enough, does follow a 4-movement format. You have the introduction, part 1, part 2, and part 3, which is which is the culmination of everything. And it's one of those pieces that you don't necessarily. It does a lot. And this is going to be one of those pieces too, where you're going to want to touch on the planning on that, where it has a lot of time signatures, which would.
Okay. Let's talk about this. So, something that there's 2 funny things about Chris that I just always, I think they're very unique to you. First of all, you're very cruel when it comes to your transcriptions, and he's laughing as I say this because He knows exactly where I'm going. Key signatures. What is it, Chris? Is it just the more flats the better? Like, what's up with your obsession with weird key signatures?
When it comes to the transcription, I try to keep everything as the original composer intended.
Sure.
So it just happens to be in a nasty key. Well, the band is going to have to deal with it because a competent wind ensemble should be able to handle with it.
Yes.
Especially those that are cross-trained that play in musicals, which go into nasty keys as a regular feature.
Yes, and then when you write your own stuff, you jump keys, you jump keys.
With my own stuff, I don't tend to be as adventurous with a key signature unless it really calls for it. Like my rag piece, it does get into a very adventurous key, but that's just because of how I naturally wandered into it, and then I get it back to more or less his original key. One of my other compositions, it stays in fairly neutral, it stays in very approachable keys, but it ends on a completely different key from the one it started with.
I definitely know that you have called me cackling about some evil, cruel tonal journey that you've taken some poor clarinetist on. And then rhythm is the same. You really enjoy interesting rhythm.
The Oregon Symphonic Band is playing Alfred Reed's Armenian dances, and it has a huge section there in 5/8 that reverses itself every other measure. So it goes 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. But that's very indicative of that style of music from Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe is fairly known for having these claves. Arturo Marquez's Danzon No. 2 has a very similar clave, but in strict 4/4 time. I'd have to look at the music, but it does have that very Latin-y clave that makes the piece very enjoyable. But some composers keep their claves in a traditional 4/4 meter, where it's what's going on inside the bar that gives it the distinction. Others feature a time signature which lends itself to which gives it the clave. So compound meter that is fairly strange. Frank DeKelly's Vesuvius, it's a band piece, has a clave that's an 8/8, but it is played in 3. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 that type of thing. Pat Metheny does quite interesting things. So his piece, The First Circle, is in 22/8.
Like, just what?
And the music itself, if you look at his book of lead sheets, that is broken up in a 12/8 and a 10/8 half. So half of it is in 12/8, half of it is in 10/8. If you break those down further, it's 5 and 4. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10. And
bravo, just like that was amazing.
And that's actually the easy part. The introduction has the performers clapping the offbeats.
Oh man,
that is like.
Do you think he's a nice guy?
I mean, the band plays it.
Is he just really evil? Is he just evil, or is he on his own planet? I guess Pat Metheny's kind of transcended humanity at this point. He's beyond human. He's post-human.
It sounds really good, so I like it.
It does sound really good, yeah.
But yeah, the way up has sections where instead of using like a standard markings to indicate slowdowns or accelerations, the way he pulls it off to pull time changes off is he'll start overlapping different rhythms against each other. So you have like a section where it's just running eighth notes, and then he'll change the time signature, or he'll change the tempo marking. So all of a sudden these eighth notes become like dotted 16th notes, but
Oh
they're
man.
but it's the same length played, and then have the running new part running eighth notes. So you start having the beat getting out of phase. So you could fade out the original one and bring in the other one as a new one.
That
That
is that is so complex and genius.
that and Adam Neely is a YouTuber who talks a lot about music theory, and he trained at Berkeley as a jazz as a bassist, and he does a video where he talks about a lot about these different rhythms, and like tempo markings on a metronome. We can't really tell the difference between say 96 and 97. We
Yeah.
can't.
Right.
We have the discrete changes like 96 to I think it's 108 and maybe one in between. But when we were talking like calling for rhythm for tempos like a 133.67 is like what? And he has a video. It's like, why this is kind of nonsense, but this is what's going on, what the idea behind it is, and whether it works or not. So so it is recommended. If you don't follow Adam Neely on YouTube, go look him up.
Nice.
As far as symphonies go, going back to that, there are some interesting entries here. The band Muse has an entry here because they did write a symphony, the Exogenesis Symphony. That's what it's called. And so the album, The Resistance.
Now, do you double check that? Like, just because they say that, is it actually?
It's in 3 movements.
Okay.
And it does, and it's obviously very short because it's still only like 3 songs on this album. But it does reach for that scope and what we think of the symphonic sound, obviously using more rock instruments with attendant orchestral instruments to back it up.
Yeah.
And we're not talking full string sections here. We're like using 1 or 2 that might be played by members of the band or the bringing ringers. Well, another one here that might be definitely considered a controversial one. This is called Symphony by the band Clean Bandit. And I haven't noticed it's a pop song, not long form piece. And I have all the people who actually wrote it. So Steve Max, Zara Larson, Amar Malik, Jack Peterson. And it's not a piece I've heard myself and included right now because, it'd be worth listening to. If they call it a symphony, traditionally we wouldn't associate that with that.
Sure.
With the
so
form.
that one you haven't listened to?
I haven't heard that one. But the idea behind this one is to compile a list of every single symphony, put them in chronological order, take the variants of those established symphonies, so transcriptions for band transcriptions going in weird directions. So we're taking like the Beethoven symphonies for 2 pianos, for example,
Right.
and putting them in their appropriate year for the transcriptions completion or first performance. We know that. Then the idea of this is what I ultimately wanted to do is also get recordings of these and play them back. But the more interesting idea for me, and this is to take the geographic aspect of this, note where they were written and note the historical country compared to the modern country. For example, if we take Johann Sebastian Bach, everyone would say, oh, Germany. Well, in 1723, Germany didn't exist. What was it then? Oh, it was the Holy Roman Empire.
So yeah, what I love here is you're really tracking. I mean, like, Zeitgeist is all about music and culture, right? All music comes from somewhere. And this is such a comprehensive line, very messy line from today all the way back. Like, we're still appreciating this, certain people who connect to the Western classical tradition. This stuff is the bread and butter of all of it. But it again, it only makes sense when it's written. I connect to Beethoven really strongly, but that doesn't mean that when I listen to Bach, I can't see the vibrancy there. I can. It just doesn't, like, my personal, what I prefer is more Beethoven, but when it comes to Bach, I could be swayed that Bach is as vibrant and alive. It's just I happen to connect to Beethoven. But this type of database is so interesting because it's so far beyond the stuffiness that can accompany history sometimes,
or even the stuffiness that classical music is saddled with.
Right.
And we still kind of see them doing this. There's a stereotype. You go to a chamber ensemble and you just see the musicians just dripping pretension as they play, and it's like, that's not enjoyable. There's no musicality to it.
Right. There's like yeah, exactly. Whereas, that's not where this stuff came from. That's when people heard this stuff, they jumped to their feet. It was dirty, it was messy. It was like how Shakespeare, he was raunchy, and now it's classy to go see Shakespeare. Well, people think it's classy to go see, Liszt, but ladies were throwing their underpants at him on stage.
Or you have Mozart.
Oh my God, Mozart.
Yeah, he would be cracking fart jokes left and right.
Yeah.
And then you'll go to a chamber concert where they're playing one of his string quartets, and they're just playing it as if it's the most serious thing ever. And it's like, I think you're missing the point of this.
Exactly, yes. And it's funny, the surprise symphony. If you have studied musical theory, that's funny. Like, I burst out laughing, like literally burst out laughing in class when this.
How dare you laugh at something so serious, Morgan? Come on.
Because it's not.
How dare you clap in between movements?
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. Classical musicians get so uptight about this. And again, there's a tradition of stuffiness that has come, but it means that they like it. It means they freaking had a wonderful time at the show. Give them a break. They're enjoying it. And just because they don't know your stuffy traditions, if they clap in between movements, then they're showing their appreciation in the way that they know how.
I mean, you have in jazz, if you have that soloist that does the solo, everyone claps in the middle of the song.
In the middle of the song. Yes. I think that should totally be true in classical music. I mean, I've been very lucky to be in groups where, the quote unquote fan base, AKA all of your friends that you drag to your concerts in college, they'll hoot and holler, they'll scream and, applaud, and it's raucous and it's a great time. And I understand that people can get so devoted to their craft and to, building something and becoming very technically proficient. But I think it's really important to not lose sight of, classical music is not boring. It was new and exciting when it was written. And if you can kind of figure out like what was going on, like the Holy Roman Empire, that, what that influences a lot, it influences the fashion and the gossip, and composers don't exist in a vacuum. They're people.
Well, we'll give this the example of locations changing names. Franz Richter's symphonies in 1744. That was the Austrian monarchy. This predated the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, but where he was in the Austrian monarchy at the time is now Czechia. And if there had been a symphony written in Czechia, say 10 years ago, a lot of the time we would have called it the Czech Republic.
Right.
And people still call it the Czech Republic, even though they formally changed their names. And the fascinating thing is to see how the map has changed in Europe, especially changed so dramatically since 1597. It would be interesting to overlay a map, to show a map of where these symphonies were, like the country that's produced most symphonies. Can Austria really claim these symphonies if it doesn't exist in its form as it did anymore? For example, one I would really love to see, because I do have a couple Japanese symphonies, a couple Chinese symphonies. One I would love to see are Indian symphonies, but I don't know, but even though they do have some orchestras playing some, I don't know if they really have a tradition of really taking these Western forms and making them their own. So far, the only entry I have for India on this list is not because of an Indian composer, but because of an Indian poet, Rabindranath Tagore from West Bengal. And the only reason he's on the list is because while he was touring Europe, he ran around the culture there, and the composer Alexander von Zemlinsky, no relation to our president in Ukraine. Now, the composer, he wrote his third symphony, the Lyric Symphony. He took Tagore's poem, The Garden, had it translated into German, and set the German text, the German translation to his symphony. So Rabindranath Tagore gets the credit for the lyrics. I also did note who did the translation into German, Hans Effenberger. But that is the only entry I have for India. Now the question is, being India as part of Great Britain at the time, or actually the British India at the time, does England get the credit for it? I would say it shouldn't, but as it was part of India at the time, that becomes an interesting question. Who gets the credit for what, because of historical changes? Yeah. I would actually give the credit to India.
That's kind of an impossible puzzle.
Yeah, it
is. There's too much change that happens around empires, and I don't know. I feel like location, like city location, getting more micro than that, and then whoever happens to call that territory their own at this point in time, maybe that's who you give the credit to.
And the reason in this case, I would prefer to give it to India is because India deserves this type of recognition. India needs to be recognized for the contributions it makes to the symphonic repertoire, intentionally or unintentionally. Because
I would agree with you.
If it does get this recognition, it might spur them to be inspired to introduce their own influences onto the form and make it something better. Imperialism was such a curse to the world, but the few good things that it did give us.
Yeah, I wish it had been more of a two-way street.
Yes, I wish it had been more of a two-way street. Celebrate the things it did the few positive things it did do, and rightfully criticize everything else.
Yeah. People are people, so people are going to be influenced by what happens around them. I think that the symphonic form is so beautiful, and the Western classical tradition is one that my upbringing and background, I do relate to a lot. I associate a lot, and I feel very comfortable and familiar there. But that's not to say that I can't, that is set in stone. And again, I think that is a drawback of some of the amazing educational systems that we do have. We have some esteemed colleges, esteemed schools, and people can go on and perform in Carnegie Hall and all these places. But I think it's important for people to understand that the form has changed a lot, and the form continues to evolve.
And it's sad, there are still some composers that have a very rigid view of what the symphonic form should be.
Yes.
It should be a 4-movement structure with each movement fulfilling a certain role within what the form is. So that has to be like a second movement scherzo type of thing. Well, Beethoven, it used to be a minuet in the third movement, and Beethoven said, no, I'm making a scherzo. Oh, and I'm moving to the second movement now.
And no saxophones. Like, people get so uptight.
Well, the funny thing is, some of the people holding these rigid views are band composers. And then I'm not going to make an argument. I could make the argument that some of these single movement symphonies can be a stretch if they're not trying to convey a story.
How can people find you?
I have a couple of YouTube channels. One is kind of a general purpose where I put out my music, and the other one is where I do all my gaming for Final Fantasy and occasionally World of Warcraft. Which, if you happen to be in the Portland area, you will want to come to these two concerts here. It's going to be Saturday, the 25th is the Oregon Symphonic Band at Pacific University, 7 o'clock. We're going to be playing Bernstein's Candide, Frank Kelly's Blue Shades, massive clarinet solo in that. We're going to also be playing Alpha Reed Armenian dances, Johannes Brahms' Blessed Are They from a Deutsche Requiem, Gershwin's Second Prelude, and Holst's First Suite, as well as the Overture to Colas Brignon by Dmitri Kabavalesky. And then we're also reprising that concert as a matinee concert at the Beaverton Community Church at 3 o'clock. And more importantly, on the 26th at 7 p.m., the Le Cosuego Millennium Concert Band is doing my premiere of the Saint-Saëns First Symphony, Second Movement, as well as we're playing at the transcription of the brass band arrangement of the Carmen Fantasy by Georges Bizet, which features one of the most difficult euphonium solos in the literature, and we are featuring that solo.
Nice.
We're also playing a collection of Bernstein pieces from West Side Story, including Mambo, and we're playing Percy Granger's Molly on the Shore, Frank Kelly's Amazing Grace, and Stephen Hazo's Arabesque. So yeah, they're going to be good concerts for both of them. So if you're in the Portland area, come check us out, and you'll have a good time at those concerts.
Chris, that's a lot of music to have under your fingers, or in your embouchure, I guess. That's a lot. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. I had a really good time talking with you, and good luck with your concerts. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Zeitgeist Radio. If you'd like to take the next step in your musical journey, head over to zeitgeistacademy.com/radio for my free course to help you figure out if you have a good voice. You can also check out my online course on the basics of singing, Discover Your Voice, made especially for introverted women. Music for this episode was created by Ian Boswell. Please hit that subscribe button and tell all your friends you found a cool new podcast. See you next time.